September 10, 1944. A military transport aircraft sits on the rain-slicked tarmac of an airfield outside Brussels. Inside that cramped metal fuselage, two men are about to decide the fate of Western Europe. One of them has just demanded total control of every Allied soldier, every gallon of fuel, and every bullet on the Western Front. The other is about to speak 6 words that will echo through military history for 80 years. Bernard Law Montgomery believes he has found the path to Berlin. Dwight David Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, understands something Montgomery cannot see. The difference between tactical brilliance and strategic wisdom is about to be measured in the lives of 1 million men. Just 2 weeks earlier, the situation looked completely different. August 25, 1944. Paris fell to free French and American forces after 4 years of German occupation. The largest amphibious invasion in human history, Operation Overlord, had punched through Hitler's Atlantic Wall and achieved something that military planners had considered impossible. General George S. Patton's Third Army covered 400 miles in 26 days. The British Second Army advanced 250 miles in 3 weeks. Every intelligence report reaching Supreme Headquarters described the same phenomenon. German forces were collapsing across France. The Wehrmacht had lost 500,000 men since D-Day. The road to Berlin looked wide open, a highway to victory paved with German defeat. Then the trucks ran out of gas. September 2, 1944. Patton's Third Army ground to a halt exactly 40 miles from the German border. Not because of enemy resistance, because their fuel depots were completely empty. Tank commanders who had chased retreating Germans across France sat in their stationary armor, watching through binoculars as enemy columns disappeared over the horizon. They burned with frustration while the Wehrmacht escaped to fight another day. The problem was not incompetence or poor planning. The problem was simple mathematics combined with brutal physics. Allied supply lines now stretched 450 miles from the Normandy invasion beaches to the frontline combat units. Every gallon of fuel, every artillery shell, every can of food traveled that entire distance by truck. And those trucks burned the very fuel they were trying to deliver. The Red Ball Express ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 6,000 trucks, driven mostly by African-American quartermaster units, who received far less recognition than combat soldiers, raced forward on one-way highways created specifically to keep the armies moving. They delivered 12,000 tons of supplies per day. The combined Allied armies needed 20,000 tons per day. The math simply did not work. Port capacity created the bottleneck. Cherbourg lay damaged by German demolition. Le Havre remained unusable. Antwerp, the great Belgian port that could have solved everything, had been captured with its facilities intact. But the Germans still held the approaches, the 60-mile-long Scheldt estuary that controlled access from the sea. Everything still came through the Normandy beaches where it had landed on D-Day. 3 months of explosive advance had stretched the logistics chain so thin that it was about to snap completely. Bernard Montgomery saw opportunity where others saw only crisis. His Second Army had crossed into Belgium. Brussels was liberated, its citizens dancing in the streets. British forces now sat 280 miles closer to Berlin than they had been 3 weeks earlier. And Montgomery possessed that rarest of military gifts, the absolute conviction that he knew exactly how to end the war. On September 4th, Montgomery sent a message to Eisenhower's headquarters. The language remained formally polite. The demand was total and uncompromising. He wanted supply priority for a concentrated thrust through Belgium and Holland, across the Rhine River, and into the Ruhr industrial heart of Germany. He wanted the American armies to stop dead in their tracks. He wanted every ton of fuel, every artillery shell, every spare part diverted to his narrow front. He believed British forces could reach Berlin by Christmas. The logic of Montgomery's proposal was seductive in its simplicity. A single concentrated blow might shatter German defenses before they could reorganize after the Normandy collapse. The Broadfront advance that Eisenhower favored, with multiple armies attacking across 400 miles, would give the enemy time to establish new defensive lines. Speed and mass applied at one critical point could achieve what scattered attacks across an entire front could not. Military history seemed to support him. Every great captain from Napoleon to Rommel had preached the doctrine of concentration. Montgomery saw himself as the heir to that tradition, the commander bold enough to make the hard choice that lesser men would avoid. Eisenhower read the proposal at his headquarters in Granville, France, where he was recovering from a knee injury suffered during an emergency aircraft landing. He saw the strategic appeal immediately. He also saw something that Montgomery either could not see or chose to ignore. American forces now outnumbered British forces by 2-1 on the Western Front. American industry supplied 70% of all Allied war materials. American soldiers had died by the thousands on Omaha Beach just 3 months earlier. And Montgomery wanted Eisenhower to tell American commanders that their armies must halt their advances so British forces could have everything. The Supreme Commander had been managing this coalition for 2 years. He understood the invisible tensions that threatened to tear it apart at any moment. British generals resented American inexperience and what they viewed as naive enthusiasm for untested doctrines. American commanders bristled at British caution and what they perceived as colonial condescension. Winston Churchill watched every military decision through the lens of British imperial preservation, knowing that his nation was exhausting itself in a war it could not afford to lose. Franklin Roosevelt's generals answered to an American public that had no desire to see their sons die for British glory or to restore the British Empire. Montgomery seemed blind to these realities. He saw only military logic, pure and simple. His plan could work. It might win the war by Christmas. Someone needed to have the courage to make the hard choice, and Montgomery had convinced himself that he was that someone. September 10th dawned gray and wet over Brussels. Montgomery demanded a face-to-face meeting. Eisenhower agreed, partly because he recognized the need to manage this difficult subordinate personally, partly because he understood that refusing to meet would only inflame the situation. Eisenhower's knees still bothered him, making movement difficult. He remained in his aircraft when it landed at Brussels airport. Montgomery came aboard. The stage was set for one of the most consequential conversations of the entire war. 2 men, 2 strategies, 2 visions of how to defeat Nazi Germany. Only one of them would leave that aircraft with his plan intact. The conversation started professionally enough. Maps spread across the small table. Montgomery outlined his plan with the precision that had made him famous. He needed absolute priority, not shared priority, not some of the supplies, everything. His tone carried the assumption that Eisenhower would eventually see reason, would recognize the brilliance of the conception, would yield to the superior tactical mind. Montgomery was, after all, the man who had defeated Rommel at El Alamein when Britain desperately needed victory. He had planned the D-Day ground campaign. His forces had fought hard through the Normandy hedgerows. Eisenhower respected his record, but respect did not mean agreement. Montgomery finished his presentation. He waited for approval. Instead, Eisenhower began talking about the Broadfront strategy, explaining that attacking on multiple axes prevented German concentration, forced the enemy to defend everywhere, protected the alliance by ensuring that all national contingents advanced together. Montgomery interrupted. He had exhausted his patience with this American caution. He told Eisenhower that the Broad Front was militarily unsound, that it wasted the momentum bought at such terrible cost in Normandy. He said that political considerations should never override military necessity, that someone must make the hard choice. The words hung in a small aircraft cabin like smoke from a fired cannon. Military necessity, hard choice. Someone must decide. Montgomery had just told the Supreme Commander of Allied forces that he lacked the courage to make difficult decisions, that he was prolonging the war through weakness. Eisenhower's expression changed. People who served under him for years rarely saw him truly angry. He governed by patience, by consensus building, by keeping the fractious alliance together through personal relationships and careful diplomacy. His entire command style was built on making British and American commanders feel heard, respected, valued. Montgomery had just questioned all of it, had implied that Eisenhower was a political general without the stomach for real military decisions. The Supreme Commander leaned forward. His voice remained level, controlled, professional. But everyone in that aircraft felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. Eisenhower explained that the supply situation was temporary, that opening Antwerp would solve the logistics crisis, that no single thrust would receive priority at the expense of all others. The broad front strategy was not open for debate. Montgomery pushed back. He argued that the opportunity existed now, that waiting for Antwerp meant waiting weeks while German defenses solidified, that concentrated force beat dispersed advance every time in military history, from Cannae to Sedan. His tactical logic was sound. His strategic vision was clear, at least to him, and Eisenhower had reached his limit. "Steady, Monty," Eisenhower said. "You can't talk to me like that, and I'm your boss." 6 words spoken quietly in a military transport plane on a rainy airfield in Belgium. The Supreme Commander had just reminded Britain's most senior field commander that there existed a chain of command and that it ran through one person. The moment crystallized everything about this alliance, about the war, about the nature of coalition warfare itself. Britain had entered this war in 1939, fighting alone for an entire year after France fell in 6 weeks. British cities had burned under German bombing. British soldiers had died in Norway, in France, in Greece, in Crete, in North Africa, in Italy, in Burma. 60,000 British civilians had been killed by German aircraft and rockets. British intelligence had broken the German codes. British planners had conceived the deception operations that made D-Day possible. And now an American general with far less combat experience than Montgomery was telling him no. But military rank is absolute. Eisenhower commanded, Montgomery did not. The organizational chart was clear, even when the personalities were not. Montgomery absorbed the rebuke. He shifted tactics, proposing instead Operation Market Garden, a bold airborne assault to seize bridges across the Dutch rivers and open a corridor for ground forces to punch through to the Ruhr. Eisenhower considered this alternative. It was ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. It involved dropping 3 airborne divisions 60 miles behind enemy lines. They would have to seize and hold multiple bridges until ground forces could fight through to relieve them. The plan required precise coordination, perfect timing, and enough supplies to support the operation while maintaining pressure elsewhere on the front. The Supreme Commander gave his approval. Market Garden would receive priority, including American airborne divisions. But Patton's Third Army would keep advancing in the south. Bradley's forces would continue operations in their sectors. The Broadfront would continue. Montgomery accepted this compromise, believing that once Market Garden succeeded, once British armor crossed the Rhine and threatened Ruhr, Eisenhower would have no choice but to shift everything north. This would be the breakthrough. September the 17th, 1944. 20,000 paratroopers dropped from the sky over Holland. The largest airborne operation in history was underway. C-47 Dakotas stretched across the horizon, towing gliders filled with soldiers, jeeps, and artillery. British XXX Corps began its thrust north along a single highway that would become famous for all the wrong reasons. Montgomery's vindication lay 60 miles away, across 3 major river obstacles, and through whatever German forces happened to be in the way. The operation bore all the hallmarks of Montgomery's thinking: bold, decisive, concentrated. It also contained the seeds of its own destruction, seeds that were visible to anyone willing to look closely. The 82nd Airborne Division secured the bridges at Nijmegen after ferocious fighting that would later be immortalized in film. The 101st Airborne took its objectives around Eindhoven despite heavy casualties from German flak and ground fire. But the British 1st Airborne Division landed at Arnhem, the farthest bridge, the critical objective, and immediately encountered problems that no amount of planning could have fully anticipated. German resistance proved far heavier than intelligence had suggested. 2 SS Panzer divisions, including the 9th and 10th SS Panzer divisions, were refitting in the Arnhem area. Allied intelligence had missed them completely or had chosen to downplay their presence. British paratroopers landed 8 miles from their bridge objective instead of directly on it, a decision made because flak concentrations made closer drop zones too dangerous. Radio equipment failed, resupply drops missed their targets, and the single highway that XXX Corps absolutely required to reach them became the longest shooting gallery in Western Europe. By September 20th, British forces at Arnhem were surrounded. They held a perimeter around the north end of the bridge, but could not break out to secure the entire structure. The bridge itself became a killing zone, with German forces holding the south end and pouring fire across the span. XXX Corps was stuck 11 miles south, unable to advance because the highway was a single lane raised above surrounding flooded fields. Every vehicle destroyed blocked the advance for everyone behind it. German artillery, perfectly positioned, pounded the highway with relentless accuracy. The plan that had looked so brilliant on maps in London and Brussels was bleeding to death in Dutch farmland, killed by German steel and German determination. September 25, 1944. Operation Market Garden ended in failure. The British 1st Airborne Division evacuated what remained of its strength across the Rhine under cover of darkness. They had lost 1,485 killed. 6,414 men became prisoners of war. American airborne divisions suffered over 3,500 casualties. The bridges that were supposed to open a highway to the Ruhr had instead become tombs for the airborne soldiers who tried to take them. The operation proved something that Montgomery would never admit. Concentrated thrusts into fortified territory without absolute supply superiority and without overwhelming combat power at the point of decision fail against determined defenders who can concentrate their own forces more quickly than the attacker can reinforce success. Montgomery never admitted that Market Garden was a mistake. He argued instead that it was 90% successful, that it had secured important territory that would be useful later, that it would have worked with more supplies, more support, more priority. His reports to London emphasized gains while minimizing losses, a pattern that would continue throughout the war. Eisenhower said nothing publicly. Privately, he noted that the concentrated thrust Montgomery had demanded so forcefully had just cost 10,000 Allied casualties and achieved none of its strategic objectives. The Broadfront strategy that supposedly wasted opportunities kept grinding forward on multiple axes. The supplies that Montgomery insisted should go entirely to his command were instead sustaining advances that actually succeeded. October 1944 brought new challenges. Antwerp's approaches remained contested as the 1st Canadian Army fought brutal battles through flooded polders to clear the Scheldt estuary. German defenders, knowing that losing the Scheldt meant losing access to the port, fought with desperate determination. The port would not open until late November. Supply problems continued to plague every Allied commander. Every general wanted priority for his sector. Every advance competed for limited resources. Montgomery submitted another proposal, another concentrated thrust, another argument that political considerations were preventing military victory. Eisenhower read these messages with decreasing patience. The alliance required unity. Montgomery provided constant friction. December 16, 1944. German forces launched the most devastating surprise attack of the Western European campaign. 3 German armies, including crack SS Panzer divisions, hit a thinly defended sector of the American lines in the Ardennes Forest. Total surprise, total shock. The attack exploited the exact vulnerability that concentrated thrust doctrine created. While Montgomery had wanted everything focused north for his single thrust, Eisenhower's Broadfront strategy kept forces distributed across the entire front. Now, those distributed forces faced Hitler's last gamble, the desperate attempt to split the Allied armies and seize Antwerp. The initial German breakthrough was catastrophic. American units were surrounded, scattered, destroyed. Entire regiments vanished into the winter forests. The attack drove 60 miles deep into Allied lines, creating the bulge that would give the battle its name. For 48 hours, the situation looked desperate. Eisenhower responded with the flexibility that the Broadfront strategy enabled. He shifted reserves from calm sectors to the Bulge. Patton's Third Army, which Montgomery had wanted to halt completely, pivoted 90 degrees north in 48 hours and attacked into the German flank. British forces moved south to block any breakthrough toward Antwerp. The distributed forces that Montgomery had criticized for 6 months became the mobile reserve that contained the crisis. The Broadfront strategy proved its worth not in glorious advances, but in the ability to respond to catastrophe. December 20th, Eisenhower made a controversial decision. He temporarily placed all American forces north of the breakthrough under Montgomery's command. The front was split because Bradley's headquarters south of the Bulge could not communicate reliably with forces north. Montgomery could coordinate the northern response more quickly. It was a tactical necessity born of geography and communications. It was also politically explosive. American units that had fought their way from Normandy were now taking orders from the British commander who had just failed at Market Garden. Montgomery handled this responsibility carefully at first. He coordinated the defense. He positioned British reserves. He ensured that German spearheads could not reach Antwerp. By Christmas, the German offensive was contained. By January, it was collapsing. Then Montgomery held a press conference. January 7, 1945. Montgomery told reporters that he had taken command of American forces north of the Bulge and directed the defensive victory. His words, carefully chosen but devastating in their implication, suggested that British leadership had saved disorganized American units. British newspapers ran headlines about Montgomery's brilliance. American newspapers exploded with fury. The political crisis that Montgomery's original supply demands could have caused was now happening anyway, triggered by his public relations disaster. Eisenhower read these reports with cold anger. Montgomery had just violated the fundamental rule of coalition warfare. Never claim credit in ways that humiliate your allies. Never turn military operations into national competitions. Never make public statements that damage the trust essential to combined operations. Bradley was furious. Patton was furious. American commanders who had suffered through the Ardennes fighting demanded that Eisenhower remove Montgomery from command. Eisenhower drafted a message to the combined chiefs of staff. The language was diplomatic, but the meaning was clear. Either Montgomery retracted his implications about American incompetence, or Eisenhower would request his relief. The Supreme Commander was prepared to force Britain to choose between Montgomery and the alliance. Churchill intervened personally. The Prime Minister understood what Eisenhower's staff officers already knew. Britain was now the junior partner in this alliance. American forces, American production, American logistics dominated the Western Front. If this became a choice between British pride and Allied unity, Britain would lose everything. Churchill pressured Montgomery to apologize. Montgomery issued a clarification. It was grudging and minimal, but it was enough to prevent open rupture. The crisis passed, the alliance held, and Montgomery, characteristically, learned nothing from the experience. March 7, 1945. The American 9th Armored Division captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact, the first crossing of the Rhine. It was an accident of war, a moment of opportunity seized by junior officers who found a bridge the Germans had forgotten to destroy. Eisenhower's Broadfront strategy, exploiting multiple axes, delivered what Montgomery's concentrated thrust at Arnhem could not. March 22nd, Patton's Third Army crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim. March 23rd, Montgomery's forces crossed at Wesel after massive preparation, including the largest airborne operation since Market Garden. By April, the entire Western Front was across the Rhine and driving into Germany. Montgomery's forces advanced north toward Hamburg and the Baltic. Bradley's armies drove through central Germany, heading for the Elbe River. Patton's forces raced through Bavaria toward Czechoslovakia and Austria. The broad front that supposedly wasted opportunities was now collapsing German resistance across 400 miles. Multiple thrusts prevented German concentration. Every sector faced relentless pressure. The Wehrmacht had no reserves, no mobility, no options. The strategy Eisenhower had defended against 6 months of pressure from Britain's most famous field commander was delivering total victory. April 30th, 1945. Hitler committed suicide in the bunker beneath Berlin. May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally at Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims. The war in Europe was over. The strategy Eisenhower defended against 6 months of pressure from Britain's most famous field commander delivered total victory. The historical debate continues. Montgomery's defenders argue September 1944 was a missed opportunity. Eisenhower's supporters note every concentrated operation Montgomery commanded ended in failure. German records tell a clearer story. The Wehrmacht was more resilient than Allied intelligence estimated. Ultra-intercepts showed German commanders expected concentrated thrusts and prepared reserves. The broad front forced constant retreat because defending everywhere meant defending nowhere effectively. Supply records proved Montgomery's forces received substantial priority for Market Garden. It failed anyway. Not from lack of supplies, but because 3 airborne divisions could not hold a 60-mile corridor against determined armored counterattacks. Weather records show autumn 1944 brought heavy rains that would have stopped any single thrust, regardless of supply priority. What Eisenhower said when Montgomery demanded everything was simple. "Steady, Monty. You can't talk to me like that. I'm your boss." 6 words that defined coalition warfare. Montgomery wanted to be the general who won the war with one bold thrust. Eisenhower understood winning required keeping the alliance together, maintaining flexibility, and grinding down the enemy everywhere until collapse was inevitable. History proved Eisenhower right. Not dramatically, but completely. The broad front strategy delivered total victory. Montgomery demanded supplies because he believed concentrated force wins wars. Eisenhower denied them because he knew coalitions win wars. Only one understood World War II was not a tactical problem, but a political military challenge requiring America, Britain, and all allies committed to total victory. If you had been in Eisenhower's position, facing pressure from a more experienced British commander with a plan that might have worked, would you have given Montgomery what he demanded, or made the same call Eisenhower made? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.